It's time once again for another Two Women Talking. It is once again another Three Women Talking. And this Three Women Talking, I am joined by Eileen and Bianca, two returning favorites on Two Often Three Women Talking. And this conversational cycle, we are talking about female comic book heroes, female superheroes. And we're going to do this in 4 parts. We're going to do part 1, what goes wrong? Is there any way to improve it? Part 2, most favorite and least favorite, tease that up. Part 3, how to have sexy female characters that aren't sexually exploitative. And part 4 will be a surprise. I'm going to save terminology for part 4 because if I say it out loud, people will prejudge and we don't want that. So let's start. We've got our Marvel expert in Eileen, and Bianca is DC and manga. So we've gotten Eileen. You read a lot of manga as well, right? Watch a lot of anime, read a lot of manga.
Yes, not so much recently, but yes.
Yeah, we know enough about it, but I thought it would be a good split. So let's give Bianca the start because Bianca, you do a lot of like podcasting and streams and stuff like that about comic books, and you interact with air quotes the fans. And whenever there's a female superhero, the fans get spicy. What do you see happening there?
Well, there's many who are very open about how they feel with the characters, which I'm usually complete. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. If it gets too much to the point of okay, so how do I say this? So sometimes when they express how they feel about certain female characters, sometimes some unhealthy stuff starts seeping in, and I like either sometimes sexist or misogynist things, mostly because a majority of the fan base that I've been in these communities are men and people
Mm-hmm.
who identify as males.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I notice, and Eileen, I'm sure you have thoughts about this, is you hear it's unrealistic coming from men about the female experience in superhero comics. I think turning into a rock man or suddenly being stretchy or bursting into flame is not realistic. So you're very good at responding to those things.
Yes.
Yeah, what's your take on when people have mutant powers? This isn't realistic. The minute a female character kind of gets reimagined or a writer has a different take on her, things tend to get spicy very quickly when that happens.
Yes. Okay. First of all, I feel like we need to make a distinction. We are talking about fans, explicitly fans within air quotes.
Right.
Like the air quotes are important here. Uh, what is happening with it? Um, the minute here's the thing. When you have a male superhero character, they can be whatever the story needs them to be. They can be a mutant, they can set themselves on fire, they can become rock. Nobody bats an eye. The minute a female superhero, a female character, does anything, she is no longer just a mutant, a superhero, an alien, whatever. She's a female alien, a female
Right.
mutant. Yes. So everything she does is automatically representative of every woman everywhere.
Hmm.
This happens with any minority, not just women. So the standards are set to a much higher place with female superheroes than and with any other character, just because the fact that they are women,
Yeah.
which I feel is unfair. Like, we don't do this, like we don't say it's unrealistic with Jenny Storm becoming engulfed in flame,
Right.
or um anything that Spider-Man does is not representative of every single white male superhero character, the
Right.
same way that it is with Ghost Spider when Stacy, when she does it.
Yeah,
So it's an unfair requirement, it's an unfair treatment, and it prevents superhero comic book characters from being assessed and valued individually.
yeah. There is an interesting thing about female superheroes. This took me a while to understand because apparently guys don't see themselves in male superheroes. They're more not even aspirational. They're just big, strong guys who are cool, cooler than them. But they get very very personal regarding these female characters. And I think it functions deeper than just it being spank bank material. There's almost like a patron saint, pinup girl, surrogate big sister. I did notice that suddenly a whole bunch of guys who I didn't know read comics became experts on She-Hulk. And
Yeah.
She-Hulk was one of those comics that was written very unevenly. You know, she was fun, she was funny. Her lack of impulse control in the books was cool. You know, it was fun, good for a laugh. And of course, what a lot of guys glommed onto is she was very promiscuous, right? And that was seen as sort of modernity or sort of a a strength sign back in the day when, you know, Rob Liefeld was drawing women with no feet. Uh, but you see some of the lines in the comics. I remember it's this one where she's just banged Tony Stark again. And the dialogue is, Tony, why do you get to sleep with anybody you want? But the minute I do, I'm seen as cheap or something like that. And I thought, whoever wrote that, every woman in the world knows why.
Yeah, we felt it.
Yeah, Bianca, what do you have to say about that?
So when the She-Hulk show came out, so I was actually already reading a lot of She-Hulk comics before that happened. And of course, one of them being like her very first canceled 25 issue
Yeah.
Savage She-Hulk. And then what else do I have? I didn't get John Byrne yet, which is the one people favor the most.
Yeah.
I did get, oh shoot, what's his name? He was after John Byrne. So don't remember. Dang it. But that's the other one I have, where it's mostly her being in the superhero division part of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it wasn't just men who said that they were fans that I spoke to when talking about the show. It was also a few women, a few older women who were saying how they couldn't relate to the She-Hulk in the show because she's too different. She doesn't act like she does in the comics. And then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, her promiscuity part was also a really big topic.
What?
And
Oh yeah,
and
she is defined by that in the books, and I thought it was. I mean, you're talking about books that in some, you know, the 90s through the early 2000s, right? It was a different time, right? Sorry to cut you off, Bianca, but I just
no,
want to
you're
sort of
good.
frame when we're talking about the world has changed, entertainment has changed, what's considered likable has changed, and yet there's this expectation that everything say exactly the same, except when people think the changes are cool, and I don't know how that gets determined, right? So,
Exactly.
did you see the same thing I did? That it was almost this grieving that because I was surprised at how much sex they put in the Marvel show.
Yes.
There, she burned through a lot of guys. It just, instead of, Tony, tell me why people think I'm a slut. from the books, she knew, right? There was this sort of internal struggle, and it really did feel more like a female voice. And instead of going like I did, all right, the John Byrne stuff and so on, it was good for the time, but we're in a different time. People lost their monkey mittens. And this seems to be a thing. Like Captain Marvel was not anybody's favorite. But then the movie, it was like the Captain Marvel comics, it was good when they first relaunched her for a while. But it goes through periods where it's just, Eileen, have you found it just barely readable for large portions of Captain Marvel runs?
Yes, she seems to be a bit lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think the original, I like the black costume with the yellow swoop on it. But okay, they went with the Warbird costume, no problem, a little easier on people's bodies. But even that rebrand to Captain Marvel was very clunky in the comics. Yeah, Eileen.
Yeah, I believe I believe we all suffer from lack of context, especially when things get adapted from comic books to movies to TV shows, etc. Uh, the original Captain Marvel, when she must miss Marvel,
Hmm.
came at a time where feminism was having like a big thing,
Yeah.
especially in the US. And the established female superhero was the idealized for the time super.
Hmm.
They were smart women, but also very feminine women, very proper women. We had Sue Storm, who was sort of like the prototype female superhero. She was smart, she was caring, she was a family model,
Yeah.
and every other woman was also that. They were also uh, X and Y female companion, girlfriend, situationship, etc.
Hmm.
In comes Miss Marvel, who not only is nobody's girlfriend except for Marvel, but that lasts like 5 minutes.
Hmm.
And she's allowed to not only be her own superhero, but she's also abrasive.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's feminine, but she's strong, and she's kind of abrasive. So she's going against the established, nurtured and cutesy and ultra feminine but nice stereotype of superwoman. Later comes She-Hulk, and for a lack of a better term, She-Hulk is allowed to be a hot mess.
Hmm.
And that is precisely going again the other established superheroes with that. If you're going to be a female superhero, you have to be pretty and nice and caring, and you also have to have everything in your life together. She-Hulk is like that. She's a professional. She's barely hanging on. She's a hot mess. She
Hmm.
has a string of boyfriends, like in the aforementioned scene, and that at the time was important because it was a commentary against the enshrined women, the
Hmm.
perfection women. You talk about this in Two Women Talking and in Wellness Wednesday before.
Yeah. And it's interesting because people, I mean, like you said, She-Hulk was sort of it was it was definitely part of that like humor comics of that period of time. And they were sort of using her as almost a commentary on how perfect I mean, she'd do things like get fired for photocopying her butt, and it's like,
Yes.
how'd you know it was me? You use the color copies, things like that. But it took a while for her to work out. Captain Marvel, though, my God, she was the seventh Captain Marvel. And that was as of the late 1960s. Because it was
Yes.
Marvel, and there were all these Vels, right? Monica Rambeau was actually she came in the 80s. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, Marvel the pre-Imperial officer was the first one. But they fused her with Carol Danvers for the movie. And
Which was weird.
I was confused so often. But the people that just they made it bad, they made it shit. It's like Captain Marvel in her many incarnations has been shit longer than it's been good.
That's true.
Unfortunately.
Right. Like the Captain Marvel comics, some gorgeous covers by Frank Cho when they relaunched her to try to be, Marvel's Wonder Woman, which is kind of weird. I mean, her biggest accomplishment was Rogue got her powers by putting Ms. Marvel in a coma, right? I mean, that was Carol Danvers' big achievement in Marvel Comics for the
And
longest
she
time.
was like that for a while.
Long, like decades. And so I did not buy that anybody was terribly attached to that character. And I think you're right, Eileen. I think that there is a certain flattening, and not just male readers do it. You read a lot of hot takes in things like Jezebel and whatnot, the Mary Sue, about what it means for women and what it means for the strong female character. And we got to let these characters be individuals, right?
Yeah.
It really bugged me during, and I mean, Bryan Singer played it very, very safe and just made, this is an exaggeration, but like half his X-Men female characters just mute, right? They just don't speak. Problem
They are
solved,
just there.
right?
Or make really bad jokes.
Or make really bad. But I mean, after Mystique barely spoke in that first Bryan Singer film, I'm like, all right, I'll take it. They wanted a model. They didn't trust her acting. Fine. But then they did it with Lady Deathstrike again. And I'm like, you do not get to. Right. And I came out of X2 angry. And this is why I really have an issue with the you changed it crowd, because that's a major change, right? Like Deathstrike's such a worthy antagonist in the comics, and she's cool looking. And not only was she basically one fight, she was the Terminator guy. She was the Robert Patrick Terminator. Have you seen this boy with one fight in X2? But she didn't look like the comic book character at all.
Man, and then they did it again with Calypso in the third.
Yeah, but they changed it then. There was no uproar. There was no rage, right?
Well, because she looked hot.
Right. And there's more and I guess because they made her more conventionally attractive.
Yes.
I mean, why Mystique had to be naked, that I thought Mystique's comic book costume was cool with like the skull belt and all that.
I love this Bell.
Yeah,
It's
the
my
fact that we didn't
favorite
get
thing
the
about her.
the
Yes.
fact that we didn't get the skull belt, but Mystique is very intelligent. She's calculating, she's conniving, and we lost all of that in the movie. But what I was told at the time is we have to support it or they won't make more. That was what it was like now.
I was
Now,
pretty young.
yeah, I've been around a while. I saw the original Iron Man in
I
theaters.
remember.
I saw you, young whippersnapper. I saw Spider-Man when he was played by Tobey Maguire. Like that's how far back we're
I used
going now.
to have to walk uphill in the snow, back and forth to get my comics.
Yeah, and I noticed that nobody complains that they didn't do Iron Man's alcoholism storyline. Like that was the major definitive Iron Man story in Marvel Comics history.
They also didn't make Iron Man, for the lack of a better term, a loser. Because I remember Iron Man used to not be cool before Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah. But that's
He was
the
in the
thing.
Avengers, he paid the bills, he was there. Everyone was reading the Avengers for any other Avenger,
Yeah.
not Iron Man.
Oh, he was always the one they used when they weren't using Reed Richards to be a fucking asshole to drive the plot
Yeah.
along, right? He was a fucking asshole. He did something stupid. Plot, go fight. That was Iron Man's use for years and years and years. He wasn't the cool quippy guy that Joss Whedon put all his prima nocte jokes into his mouth. And it was interesting that they cast Robert Downey Jr. Okay, he has a history of addiction. That's enough for us. I mean, there's a lot of come again, go again assholes in Marvel Comics because and this is something I thought you were going to bring up, Eileen, but I'm going to bring up as we move into the next kind of topic about most favorite, least favorite. I labeled that this way deliberately because I don't want to say we hate a character or that a character is bad, because every single one of these characters, especially the ones that go back to like the 60s or the 40s, or in Superman's case, the late 30s, they've been written excellently and they've been written like dog shit. And you can't judge these characters based on their absolute worst run. And, especially during the spec market, there was a lot of garbage, especially on the Marvel side. It was just churn for collectible cards, right? I don't want to
Yes.
judge the characters based on that. There are handoffs. And what the movies had the benefit of is decades and decades and decades of stories to pick from. And the fact that they had an origin story for Captain America, and that's it. Like ever since they're like, oh shit, we gotta make shit up. That just shows kind of the lack of timelessness of the writing in Captain America. And of course, they're just holding their powder dry for Planet Hulk. They tried to do like half a Planet Hulk movie in Thor Ragnarok. That they're able to pick and choose the absolute highlights. And these female characters don't have the benefit of decades and decades and decades and decades with books with their name on it, with the exception of Wonder Woman. And that was just because it was a requirement for them to keep the copyright on Wonder Woman. And so Wonder Woman books go through prolonged periods where they are garbage, right? Do
Yes.
you hear how I did the little Cree hyphenation? Like I did the little Shiar Cree hyphenation, garbage, right? And so to treat these things like paragons of high art, I think gets it wrong. If you're a longtime comics reader, you recognize that X-Men goes through lengthy periods of unreadability. Fantastic Four, Lord of Mercy, Uh, you're
Lots of
like,
Spider-Man comics too.
well, Spider-Man has multiple universes, and it's like, which Spider-Man do you like? There's so much Spider-Man. It's like there's so much Batman. How do you pick? But with these women, there's so much. They usually start as supporting characters in somebody else's book. Every so often they take off and they get a book for a limited run. A lot of these adaptations or a lot of these modern incarnations in like the cartoons or something like that, they're really inferring certain things from the books. They have to add things instead of distill the way they do with men. Does anybody agree? Does anybody have anything to add or disagree with there on that kind of central premise?
No, I'm with you.
Okay, so with that, we are going to move in to most favorite and least favorite female comic book heroes.